Hey, I want to welcome you to the September 17, 2023 message here at Meadowbrook Baptist Church called Greener Pastures. We're going to be in Genesis 13, verses 8 through 14, and then 14, verses 12 through 24. There's an old Norwegian folk tale called De Tre Bukkene Brus, which was first published in English in 1859 as Three Billy Goats Gruff. Now, I always thought Gruff spoke of their attitude or demeanor, but evidently Gruff was their family name. They were three brother Billy Goats. Now, in the story, the three Billy Goats Gruff are faced with a situation when they see that the grass where they are on their hill is getting pretty sparse. But as they look across to the hill next door, they see there is greener pastures over there. The only problem, there's a bridge, and underneath that that has to be crossed, and underneath that bridge is a troll, his name Phalanx, and he loves to eat billy goats. So they have to come up with a plan, which they do, and in the end, the troll is defeated and they get to their greener pastures. Now, in life, we often hear the phrase, the grass is always greener on the other side. Well, before that, greener pastures refers to better opportunities elsewhere. But we also hear the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. That famous phrase first took shape back in the 1st century BC with the Greek poet Ovid, who wrote in Ars Amatoria, "The harvest is always richer in another man's field." And there's been several different versions of this, such as George Herbert's 16th century saying, "The apples on the other side of the wall are the sweetest." But all of us have heard and probably dealt with the feeling that the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. An old Illinois farmer wrote to an agricultural magazine back in 1903 about the problem he was having with an old mare who was constantly tearing up the fence to lean over to eat the greener grass on the other side of the fence. And I've even seen I saw a funny picture of a cow that has plenty of green grass on her side of the fence, but yet she's straining, reaching through the barbed wire, trying to get to this grass on the other side of the fence. Now, there are tons of interesting quotes and comments about greener grass, the idea, that people think things on the other side of the fence are greener. And, one person said, the other person's grass has been watered by a lot of tears shed, or it's always storming and raining. We don't know what it's like on the other side of the fence. Someone else said it's a matter of perspective. When we're looking down at the grass, we're looking on our side of the fence, it's a different perspective. We're looking at a 90-degree angle downwards, whereas when we're looking at somebody else's grass, it's just a different perspective. Another person wrote, "You need to spend more time watering and fertilizing, take care of your own grass." Now, I have thought this before. Some people think the grass is green on the other side of the fence, but when they get over there, they find that it's AstroTurf. It's not real. And in our lives, we get focusing on the other side of the fence and alternate sources of blessing. If we just had this or that greener pasture, then everything would be fine. But the truth is that you can be living in the middle of a desert and have green pastures when the Lord is your shepherd and when you're trusting in Him for the blessings for your life. There are no greener pastures than there are when you're following God, and you know that He's got you no matter what. This morning, as we continue to look at Abraham's journey of faith in Genesis 13 and 14, we're going to see that Abram found the Lord was faithful in blessing Abram but Lot had to learn the hard way because he had his eyes on greener pastures on the other side of the fence. Particularly greener pastures of this world, folks, are dangerous, disappointing, and leads to destruction. Now, for our first part of the message, I want to look at, read Genesis 13, verses 8 through 14. Genesis 13, verses 8 through 14, which says, So Abram said to Lot, Let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine, for we are close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. Lot looked around, and he saw that the whole plain of the Jordan toward Zoar was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. Now, this was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out towards the east. The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now, the people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had parted from him, Look around from where you are to the north and south, to the east and west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you. So Abram went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he pitched his tents, and there he built an altar to the Lord. Now, last week we started looking at Genesis 12, 1 through 9, but after that, Abram's blessing, evidently a famine had come upon the land. If you have a lot of flocks of sheep and goats and cattle, then you've got problems if there's no grass. And of course, Abram could have stayed where the Lord had promised to bless him and take care of him, but instead, out of fear, he decided to go down to Egypt. And you can't blame him, I guess. If he went down to live along the Nile, there'd be plenty of grass and food. And but when he got there, he realized that he had a problem on his hands, because evidently his wife Sarah was very beautiful. Even at 65, she must have been something, because Abram thought that the Pharaoh would kill him so that he could have Sarah for his wife if he thought they were married. So he lied. He said, he told it was a lie. It was not completely true that Sarah was his sister, but really it was his half sister. You go figure. So Pharaoh took Sarah to be his wife, but when he did that, all of a sudden, terrible things began to happen. Diseases and plagues broke out on Pharaoh and his whole household. And Pharaoh figured out that something's not right here. And he found out that Sarah was Abram's wife. And so he put Abram on the carpet and said, What did you think you're doing? You've brought all this on me. You need to leave. Of course, Abram, it could have been much worse. Pharaoh could have put him to death. But they went away. Nevertheless, Abram and Lot, while they were down there in Egypt, had become even more wealthier, gaining more flocks and servants, and became rich in silver and gold. But Abram realized that his fear and giving in to fear instead of trusting God's blessing almost cost him his life. It got his attention. He made his way back to the promised land. He made his way. He made his way till he came to Bethel. It says where he had first built an altar to the Lord and called on the name Lord. It's kind of a lesson learned the hard way, that the grass wasn't greener down in Egypt. And he called upon the Lord, and he returned to the Lord, realizing that the Lord would take care of him and was a true source of blessing for his life. This morning, perhaps you have been trying to figure out your own greener pastures, and out of fear, you've made decisions, may have been untruthful, compromised, but we've got to come to back to a place where we go back to the altar and we call upon the name of the Lord as Abram did. Now the Lord blessed Abram and Lot so much that their flocks became so huge that there was not enough room in the land for them and their flocks and all the people close together. They began fighting, or at least their servants did, over the grazing land. You may have heard, or if you've ever watched a Western, often you hear about range wars, and that's fighting over public grazing land or water. And back in the 1800s and 1900s, there were a lot of these range wars. Until the government stepped in 1934 with a Public Grazing Act. But in the late 1800s, there's two families in Arizona that wound up losing nearly 50 members of almost every male member of their families in what was called the Pleasant Valley Range War. It wasn't that pleasant of a valley. Here, Abram and Lot had gotten too big of operations of cattle and their sheep and goats to be together. And Abram graciously offered Lot the choice of which land he would choose. He says, Lot, if you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go this way, I'll go that way. I'll let you choose. Now, Abram or Lot had an eye, I would say, for greener pastures. He had his eye on the plain of Jordan and all the city life down there. There were several cities located along the plain of Jordan. Archaeologists have discovered that at that time period, evidence of a lot of cities there, and evidently there was a lot of agriculture going along around the Jordan at that time. And Lot selfishly chose it for himself. He should have said no. We don't see him saying, being gracious to Abram, the older of the pair, his uncle, saying, "No, it's better that you make choice." Lot says he saw it was well watered, like the Garden of Eden, and like the land of Egypt. And Lot, boy, he had enjoyed being down in Egypt and the city life there. And he got used to the high living of Egypt, and he longed for those greener pastures. And he saw his opportunity for finer living amongst the cities. And notice what it says in verse 11. Notice how it says, Lot chose for himself. Lot wasn't thinking about anybody else. He was thinking only about himself, not what God wanted, not what was best for his older uncle Abram, but himself. And they parted company. Lot set out towards the east, which, by the way, in the Bible, when it says it went to the east, it was symbolic of whenever someone went east, that was towards wickedness. Now, it says Abraham lived. We see Abraham lived in the hill country of Canaan, and at the end, verse 18, he settles there in Hebron by the oaks of Mamre. But Lot lived among the cities of the plain. But notice there in verse 13 or verse 12, it says he pitched his tents near Sodom. He set up his tents near Sodom. Now you're going to know something different in the next chapter, I'll point out. But in verse 13, it says, now the people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. Now, Lot knew that. I think it's in Hebrews 11, says Lot was a righteous man, but he made some bad choices. And he let greener pastures get him off track. Now, folks, this old world can offer what appears to be greener pastures, but those greener pastures of opportunity and excitement of the city, a big city, but you and I have got to decide whether we live, wherever we live, whether it's in the country or the city, that our contentment doesn't come from the big city life or the country life or whatever, but our contentment is in the Lord and His blessings. He is our source. I read this week that it takes an acre of grassland to feed 2 to 3 sheep. For goats, it takes an acre for 4 to 5 each goats per acre. And that a cow takes 1 to 2 acres, I think on average 1.8 acres of grass to have enough grass to feed a cow. Now, Abraham had huge flocks and huge needs that in that hill country, that wasn't the best grassland, so they had to be on the move quite a bit. But he trusted the Lord. He had learned the hard way down in Egypt. And the Lord said to him there in verse 14, lift up your eyes, look around from where you are to the north, south, east, and west. He says, all this. He says, walk through the width, the length, and the breadth of the land, and see all that I'm going to be given to you and your offspring. And your offspring is going to be like as numerous as the dust of the earth. Abram learned the hard way down in Egypt. He repented, he came back to Bethel, and he kind of renewed his commitment, called on the name of the Lord, and he goes and settles in Hebron by these oak trees there, and it says there he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. He learned that the Lord was his source. He didn't have to live by the Nile River or the Jordan River. The Lord would take care of him wherever he went. It's kind of like what King David said, would write later in Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. When we lift up our eyes to the Lord, and not at greener pastures, we'll see that the Lord's God is wherever we're at. And but we see that Lot still had to learn the hard way. And even after that, he still didn't learn really until he lost his wife, and Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed later on, I think in Genesis 20, or no, it's Genesis 18 or 19, I forget. Let's read Genesis 14:12 through 24 to see what happened to Lot and see how Abram responded. As we read in Genesis 14, 12 through 24, where it says, they also carried off Abram's nephew Lot and his possessions, since he was living in Sodom. A man who had escaped came and reported this to Abram the Hebrew. By the way, the name Hebrew, they believe, comes from an ancestor of Abraham's called Eber, and the same consonants. Now, Abraham was living near the great trees of Mamre the Amorite, and a brother of Eshcol and Aner, all of whom were allied with Abram. When Abram heard that his relative had been taken captive, he called out the 318 trained men born in his household and went in pursuit as far as Dan. During the night, Abram divided his men to attack them. He routed them, pursuing them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus. He recovered all the goods and brought back his relative Lot and his possessions together with the women and other people. After Abram returned from defeating Kedorlaomer and the kings allied with him, the king of Sodom came out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh, which is the king's valley. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed Abram, saying, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. Then Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, Give me the people and keep the goods for yourself. But Abraham said to the king of Sodom, With raised hand I have sworn an oath to the Lord, the God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, that I will accept nothing belonging to you, not even a thread or the strap of a sandal, so will never be able to say, I made Abram rich. I will accept nothing but what my men have eaten and the share that belongs to the men who went with me to Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them have their share. in chapter 14, if you read the whole chapter, you'd read about the first warfare mentioned in the Bible. I'm sure there was wars and battles before this, but in the Bible, this is the first mention of warfare. And there were 4 kings mentioned here: Amraphel, Tidal, Kedar, but they were led by Kedorlaomer, who allied with these 3 other kings. They were from around what we would say the area of Iraq and Iran, Syria today. And these kings had bonded together and had attacked, went all the way around the Arabian desert to the north, and then came northwest, and then came down along the Jordan Valley, and it defeated all the kings and cities. These were like city-states at that time. So it had each of these big towns, like Sodom and Gomorrah, had what they called kings, their leaders. And anyway, for 12 years, Kedorlaomer and these other kings from the east had been collecting taxes and tribute, and tributes of grain, silver, and gold. But in the 13th year, the king of Sodom led a rebellion, saying, "Hey, we've had enough of this. We're not paying any more tribute." So that fall they didn't pay. But the next spring, the 14th year, guess who showed up at the doorstep? Kedorlaomer and these 3 other kings from the east and their armies, and they attacked. And they defeated Sodom and Gomorrah and Zoar and all these other towns. In the process, they carried off Abram's nephew Lot. And verse 12, notice it says, they carried off Abram's nephew Lot and his possessions, since he was, listen to this, living in Sodom. So you see, when Lot first started looking at the greener pastures, he moved his tent, set up his tent near Sodom, but now he and Mrs. Lot, or whatever his wife's name was, they and their 2 daughters, they decided, hey, wouldn't it be nice if we could live right there in Sodom? And we see a downward draw or pull or drag of the that if you start setting your eyes on the greener pasture, this wickedness of this world, and try to, it's going to drag you down. I've heard people sometimes want to ask, well, how close can I get to the world without sin, without sinning? And it's problematic because it's why are you asking that? How close can I get to the world? And I think we think that, hey, that's where the fun's at. That's where the fulfillment for my life is at. The greener pastures is in the world. So how close can I actually get without getting burnt? It's almost like asking, how close can I get to a bear trap without being caught in it? But we see Abram, who is growing his faith in the Lord, that there's something different about Abram. We begin to see a change as you read about Abram, that he had a concern for, he still loved his nephew Lot, even though Lot kind of gave him the shaft, and that Lot chose the better pasture land, and but when Abram hears that his nephew has been taken captive, he doesn't have to think about it twice. He loved Lot and cared for his dead brother's son, his nephew, and the interesting thing here is it says he calls out his 318 trained men. Can you imagine if you personally had an army of 318 trained individuals? That meant Abram, he was a pretty big deal financially and with his holdings and everything. Now, taking 318 men to fight against the armies of these 4 other kings, it doesn't look, but still, 300, you said, come on, guys, and he has 318 men that get on their horses or whatever. And also we see that Abram's neighbors, Aner, Mamre, and Eshcol, they all say, we're going with you, and they pursue the armies of these four kings, and they defeat them all the way up to Damascus, or past Damascus, which is north of Israel in Syria. And he recovers Lot and his family and all these other people from Sodom and Gomorrah that had been taken prisoners to be servants back in basically Babylon. He defeats the enemy, and he gets all the possessions and their people back. And you know, the interesting thing is we begin to see the nature of how God works. Lot, who is characterized in the New Testament as a righteous man, had been taken captive by greener pastures, but we see that the Lord is in the business of setting people who have been taken captive by the greener pastures of this world. He's in the business of setting captives free. And Abram, inspired by the Lord in his love for Lot, he went and he rescued Lot. And I want to tell you, the Lord is still, you know, you and I, sometimes we might be caught up in the greener pastures to much our own regret, finding out it's really AstroTurf, or like Irma Bombeck wrote, greener pastures are always located over greener. The grass is always greener on the other side of the fence over the septic tank, and so nothing's like it appears. But the Lord comes and he delivers people that have chased after the greener pastures of this world. And we see that after this victory, this great victory in setting of the captives free, that Abram returns with his friends and his fighting force, and they arrive at what's called the Valley of Shaveh, or called the King's Valley, which is to the east of Jerusalem, between the Mount of Olives and Jerusalem. And it about gave me the shivers as I began to think about this. And folks, we need to recognize the King of righteous, the God Most High, as the true deliverer and giver of life's blessing here. Because as we look at this, it's amazing. Abram, this victorious leader, is bringing these captives that have been set free, that have been delivered, that he's brought salvation, so to speak, to. He saved them from the hand of the enemy with the power of God's help. He brings them, and they're come over the Mount of Olives. They come down the Mount of Olives, approaching Jerusalem from the east, and there's rejoicing, and there's this parade of people. And it reminds me of a time 2,000 years later, after this victory parade, when the true King of righteousness, Jesus, comes over that same Mount of Olives, and the crowd is crying, "Save, save, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." And how Jesus came into Jerusalem victoriously in his triumphal procession. Here we have Abram coming in triumphantly, leading the captives who have been set free. And it says the King of Jerusalem, Melchizedek, who is priest of God Most High, comes out to bless Abram. And Melchizedek was interesting because he was both priest and king of Salem, which that's the same word we get shalom from, peace. The king of peace. The king, Melchizedek means king of righteousness. Who is this king of righteousness? Who is this Melchizedek? We don't know, but he certainly points forward, according to Hebrews 7, to Jesus, who has been appointed a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Psalm 110, read that at the end of that. And it says how the coming king, the Messiah, would be a priest. He will be forever after the order of Melchizedek. this King of righteousness, and certainly Jesus fulfills. And this passage points again. You have Abram coming over the Mount of Olives to Jerusalem. You have this King of righteousness coming out, and he's pronouncing blessing on Abram, saying, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, Creator of heaven and earth." Notice the mention of God as the Creator, the one true God, the Most High God, and who is the Creator, the Creator. And we recognize God is the true source of blessing, the Creator who made everything. He's our source. He's the one we look to, the green pastures, and Melchizedek brings out wine and bread. These two elements we take in the Lord's. There's just so much powerful imagery and truth here. And this priest king saying, Abram, God has blessed you. Blessed be God Most High, who has blessed Abram, the Creator of heaven and earth. And Abram responds by giving a tenth of everything he has. You know, we sometimes say, well, tithing, that's part of the law, the Old Testament, that's the law. But this happens before the law. Giving back to God in response to it's recognizing God as the source of our blessing. Abram realized that God was the source of his blessing. In response to this, Abram gave a tenth to God Most High through Melchizedek. And folks, as we recognize the blessing and the victory that God gives in our life, we give back to him. We need to recognize that the King of righteousness, the King of peace, is the true source of blessing for our lives. Our greener pastures, there's no greener pastures than it comes through him. But we've got to make a decision to resolve to rely on the Lord and not the greener pastures of this wicked world. After Melchizedek comes out and Abram gives his offering. The king of Sodom comes and say, "Hey, you just let me have my people back, and you can keep all the booty, all the possessions, all the riches." And Abraham basically said, "No way." And he says, with raised hand, I swore an oath to the great I am, to the Lord God Most High, Creator of heaven and earth, I will accept nothing belonging to you, not even a thread or the strap of a sandal, so that you will never be able to say, hey, I made Abram rich. Abram wasn't going to rely on some wicked king and the things of this world, saying that you benefit. I'm the reason you're so well off. And Abram said, "No way in the whole wide world. I won't even take anything from you." He said, "My buddies here, my neighbors, let them have their share, but I don't want anything." We ate some food from this just as we were traveling back, but I don't want anything of yours. And so Abram had said, I made a vow that I'm not accepting anything from you. My source is the Lord, the Creator, the great I am. He's got me. Back in 1930, the play called The Green Pastures was written by a man named Mark Connolly. It won the Pulitzer Prize for drama. It became a Broadway play in 1936. It was the first Broadway play that had only African American actors. The play was about this little girl retelling the whole story of the Old Testament from her perspective. And as she's retelling about Abraham and Noah and all this different things, she gets some of it mixed up a little bit, and there's a little bit of comedy and everything. But at the end of the play, I understand, a play called The Greener Pastures, it comes to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And the Lord is rejoicing that his plan of salvation is accomplished. Folks, we learn that the Lord is our shepherd. And we must depend on Him to lead us to greener pastures in life. Many times we think, oh, the grass is always greener on the other side. Oh, it's so much better over there. Oh, if I just had this. No, folks, like Paul said, I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. He is our source of blessing. The greener pastures come from the very hand and heart of God.